Have you ever wondered why the Old Testament, the part of the Bible that many people skip over, contains some of the strangest, most mysterious, and most controversial stories ever written? Why would a book that begins with creation also be filled with floods, wars, giants, burning bushes, plagues, angels with flaming swords, and prophets who claim to see visions of the future thousands of years ahead of their time? Some say the Old Testament is just history. Others argue it's myth. And still others believe it holds the hidden keys to understanding everything that is happening in our world right now. But here rests the real question. If this ancient collection of writings was only meant to be a history book, then why does it still divide opinions, spark debates, and inspire millions of people after thousands of years? And here is where it gets even more shocking. Many of the prophecies in the Old Testament were written centuries before they happened, and yet history confirms them. Was that coincidence? Or was it divine? In this video, we're going to uncover the Old Testament like you've never seen it before. From the Garden of Eden to the exile of Israel, from the mysterious visions of Daniel to the cries of Jeremiah, every moment connects like pieces of a giant puzzle. And I promise you, each section will only get more interesting. The next story will challenge what you thought you knew about God, about history, and maybe even about your own life. So buckle up, because by the time we reach the end, you won't see the Old Testament the same way again. In the beginning, before the stars were born, before time even ticked its first second, there was God, a God who needed nothing, yet chose to create everything. Imagine the silence of the void being broken by the words, "Let there be light." And suddenly light pierces darkness. The universe awakens, and the story of humanity begins. But hold on, because this is not just any story. This is a story of creation, rebellion, redemption, and the promise of something greater yet to come. And trust me, the next parts will only grow more mysterious and more powerful. On the very first pages of the Old Testament, we see the breathtaking power of God's hand. Day by day, the earth is formed. The seas are set in their boundaries, the skies filled with stars, the land with trees and animals. And finally, humanity is created not as an accident, but as the very image of God Himself. Adam and Eve are placed in the garden, a paradise where everything is perfect. No pain, no death, no suffering. But the perfection does not last, because the greatest drama of all time requires a conflict, and the first conflict comes from a single act of disobedience. They eat the forbidden fruit, and paradise is lost. Humanity falls into sin. The ground becomes cursed. Death enters the world, and mankind is forever separated from the holy God. But don't look away yet. The story is only beginning, and the next event will shock you even more. Humanity spreads across the earth, but sin spreads with it like wildfire. Brother kills brother. Cain murders Abel in cold blood, and jealousy poisons the human heart. Violence fills the earth until it grieves God so deeply that He decides to bring judgment. And that's when the flood comes. Imagine the skies breaking open, rain pouring down without end, oceans rising higher and higher until the tallest mountain peaks are swallowed. Yet in the middle of judgment, there is hope. Noah and his family are saved inside the ark. A wooden vessel becomes their lifeline, carrying the seed of humanity into a new world. But don't get comfortable yet, because as soon as Noah's family steps off the ark, sin shows its ugly face again. The next story reveals just how stubborn humanity can be, and how desperately they need something greater than themselves. The Tower of Babel rises like a monument of pride. Humanity gathers together, determined to build a tower that reaches the heavens. But instead of climbing closer to God, they only climb deeper into arrogance. So God confuses their language, scattering them across the earth. Nations are formed, cultures are born, and history begins to branch out. Yet even in the scattering, God has a plan. Out of all these nations, He chooses one man, Abram, later called Abraham, and makes a promise that will change history forever. This promise is that through Abraham's descendants, all nations of the world will one day be blessed. But blessed how? What is this mysterious blessing? That secret will only unfold as we move forward, and you won't want to miss it. Abraham becomes the father of faith. He leaves his homeland with nothing but trust in God's word. He faces impossible challenges, famine, enemies, and the ultimate test, God asking him to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac. Just when Abraham is about to bring down the knife, God provides a ram in the thicket, sparing Isaac's life. This moment is more than a test. It's a preview, a foreshadowing of something far greater that will come later in the story. But let's not jump too far ahead. The next generation will bring drama, betrayal, and one of the most famous family feuds in history. Isaac's son Jacob, later renamed Israel, has 12 sons. But jealousy strikes again when the brothers sell their younger sibling Joseph into slavery. Taken to Egypt, Joseph suffers betrayal, false accusations, and years in prison. Yet God turns his suffering into triumph. Joseph rises to become second only to Pharaoh, saving Egypt and even his own family during a devastating famine. This sets the stage for the next chapter, when the descendants of Jacob multiply into a mighty nation, so mighty, in fact, that the Egyptians begin to fear them. And when fear turns into oppression, we arrive at one of the most thrilling rescues in the entire Bible. The Israelites cry out under slavery, and God raises up a deliverer, Moses. His story is one of miracles and mystery. Born under the threat of death, hidden in a basket on the Nile, raised in Pharaoh's palace, and later called by God from the burning bush, Moses becomes the chosen leader to confront the might of Egypt. The 10 plagues strike with terrifying force. Water turned to blood, locusts covering the land, darkness swallowing daylight, and finally the death of the firstborn. But the Israelites are spared through the blood of the Lamb, painted on their doorposts. This becomes the first Passover, a sign pointing to something much greater in the future. And when Pharaoh finally lets them go, the Red Sea parts before them, a wall of water on each side, and the Israelites walk through on dry ground. Their enemies are swallowed as the waters crash back down. Victory at last, or so it seems. But the wilderness will reveal their hearts, and the next stage of the journey will show us just how hard it is for humanity to remain faithful, even after miracles. At Mount Sinai, God descends in fire, thunder, and cloud. He gives Moses the 10 Commandments, the laws that will shape Israel as his chosen people. Yet even while the mountain shakes with God's glory, the people below bow to a golden calf. Rebellion after rebellion marks their wilderness journey, complaints, idolatry, and outright defiance. Still, God provides manna from heaven, water from the rock, and his very presence in the tabernacle. He is shaping a people, preparing them for the land he promised Abraham. But entering that land will not be easy. Battles lie ahead, walls will fall, and leaders will rise. And the next part of the story will reveal warriors, kings, and prophets, each playing their part in the unfolding plan of God. The wilderness years stretch on, and finally, a new leader rises. Joshua, the courageous warrior chosen by God, takes command after Moses. The people stand at the edge of the Jordan River, the land of promise just beyond. And then it happens. The waters of the Jordan part just as the Red Sea once did, and Israel steps into their destiny. But the first challenge is unlike anything they've faced before. Jericho, a city with walls so thick that chariots could ride along the top, stands in their way. But God's strategy is strange. No battering rams, no siege weapons, only marching and the sound of trumpets. For 6 days they circle the city in silence, and on the 7th day, with a mighty shout, the walls collapse. Jericho falls without a single sword lifted in battle. And this is just the beginning, because the conquest of the land brings both triumph and tragedy, victories and failures. as Israel learns that obedience brings blessing, while disobedience brings defeat. But the drama only grows, because once the land is divided and Joshua's generation passes, a new era begins, an era filled with chaos, betrayal, and unlikely heroes. The next part will be darker, yet more thrilling than anything before. This is the age of the judges. Israel has no king, and everyone does what is right in their own eyes. The cycle repeats again and again. Israel turns from God. Enemies rise up. The people cry for help, and God raises a deliverer. Some of these judges are unforgettable. Deborah, the prophetess who leads armies with fearless faith. Gideon, the reluctant warrior who defeats an entire Midianite army with only 300 men armed with torches and trumpets. And then there's Samson, a man of superhuman strength whose downfall comes through temptation and betrayal. His story is both inspiring and tragic. His final act, pulling down the pillars of a Philistine temple, shows that even in weakness, God can use the broken to accomplish his will. But this cycle of rebellion grows worse, and the cry for a king becomes louder. The next chapter will introduce us to kings, some who follow God, and others who drag the nation into disaster. And the rise of the monarchy will reveal some of the most traumatic moments in the Old Testament. The first king is Saul, tall and impressive, yet insecure and disobedient. His downfall is swift, and God seeks out a man after his own heart, David, the shepherd boy who becomes Israel's greatest king. From the quiet fields of Bethlehem to the battlefield against Goliath, David's story is one of courage, worship, and deep human struggle. He expands Israel's borders, writes songs that still echo in the Psalms, and establishes Jerusalem as the holy city. But David is no flawless hero. His sin with Bathsheba, his broken family, and the rebellion of his own son, Absalom, show the painful cost of disobedience. Still, God promises David something astonishing, that his throne will be established forever. This promise becomes a mystery, a thread of hope running through all of history, pointing forward to someone greater than David himself. And the next king, Solomon, will reveal both the heights of wisdom and the depths of failure, leaving us with lessons that still echo today. Solomon begins with dazzling glory. He asks not for wealth or power, but for wisdom, and God grants it abundantly. His reign is marked by peace and prosperity, and the crowning achievement is the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a place where God's presence dwells among his people. But Solomon's heart drifts. He marries foreign wives, builds altars to their gods, and compromises his devotion. The golden age begins to tarnish, and when Solomon dies, the kingdom tears in two. Israel in the north, Judah in the south, two nations divided by politics, power, and most of all, by their relationship with God. The next stage of the story will bring prophets, men who thunder warnings, deliver visions, and reveal secrets that will shake the very foundations of Israel's history. The prophets step onto the stage like voices crying out in the wilderness. Elijah confronts King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, calling fire down from heaven in a contest against the prophets of Baal. Elisha performs miracles of healing and provision, showing that God's power is not limited to judgment alone. Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel each brings a message tailored to their time, yet their words carry echoes of a future hope. They warn of exile, of destruction, of the consequences of sin, but woven into their warnings are promises of a coming king, a suffering servant, a new covenant written not on tablets of stone, but on the human heart. The suspense builds because we begin to see glimpses of something beyond Israel's immediate story, something that points to the entire world. But before those promises can be fulfilled, the people must face their darkest hour. The next chapter will be one of invasion, destruction, and exile, as everything they know collapses. The northern kingdom of Israel falls first, conquered by the Assyrians. 10 tribes are scattered, never to return as a unified nation. The southern kingdom of Judah holds out longer, but eventually Babylon comes. The temple is burned, Jerusalem's walls are torn down, and the people are carried away in chains. It is a moment of despair, the loss of land, temple, and kingship. Yet even in exile, God speaks. Through Daniel, visions of empires rise and fall, pointing toward a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Ezekiel sees dry bones come to life, a vision of restoration yet to come. Jeremiah weeps over Jerusalem, yet also proclaims a new covenant on the horizon. Even in the ashes, hope is not lost. But the waiting will be long 70 years of exile before the return begins. And when they finally return, rebuilding their city and temple, something feels different. The glory is not the same. The people wait for a promise yet unfulfilled. And the next stage of the story will reveal that silence is not the end, but a preparation for the greatest chapter of all. Between the Old Testament and the New, 400 years of silence stretch across history. No prophets speak, no visions are recorded. Empires rise and fall: Persia, Greece, and finally Rome takes control. The people of Israel cling to the writings of the prophets, to the promises given to Abraham, David, and through the voices of Isaiah and Jeremiah. They wait for the Messiah, the Anointed One who will restore the kingdom, bring salvation, and fulfill God's ancient promises. But how will he come? What form will he take? And will he match their expectations or surprise them in ways they never imagined? The Old Testament closes with an unfinished chord, a melody that cries out for resolution. And as the curtain falls on this part of the story, anticipation builds for the moment when heaven will break its silence once again. The next story is not just about Israel, but about the entire world, and it will reveal secrets hidden since the beginning of time. That silence, those 400 years, were not empty. Behind the scenes, kingdoms clashed and cultures collided. Persia gave way to Greece, and Greece to Rome. Alexander the Great spread the Greek language across the known world, so that one day, when the message of God's kingdom would burst forth, it could be spoken in a tongue nearly everyone could understand. Roads were built, trade expanded, cities flourished, and yet the people of Israel still felt the weight of unfulfilled promises. Every festival, every Sabbath, every sacrifice at the rebuilt temple was a reminder of something greater they were still waiting for. The question hung heavy in the air. When will the Messiah come? But this silence itself was like the drawing of a bowstring, the tension building, waiting to release in explosive power. And the next revelation would shake not only Israel, but the entire world. But before we leap forward into that moment, let's step back and draw deeper into some of the treasures hidden within the Old Testament itself, because every thread of this story matters. Think of it like a tapestry. From Genesis to Malachi, each thread seems small on its own, but together they weave a picture so intricate that it takes your breath away. For instance, have you noticed how water keeps showing up at key turning points? From the waters of creation to the flood, from the Red Sea to the Jordan River, each watery moment signals both judgment and new beginnings. Could it be pointing to something still greater? Something that will come later with a man who walks on water and calms storms with a word? The Old Testament whispers secrets, and the closer you look, the more you see patterns that will one day explode in clarity. The next clue is hidden in the feasts themselves. The feasts of Israel were not just holidays. They were prophetic shadows. Passover celebrated freedom from Egypt, but it also pointed to a greater deliverance to come. The Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, was about the harvest, but also hinted at a future outpouring. The Feast of Tabernacles recalled the wilderness wanderings, yet also foreshadowed a day when God himself would dwell permanently among his people. Every sacrifice, every grain of incense, every priestly robe was like a signpost pointing forward. It's as if the Old Testament itself is saying, the next act will reveal the mystery. And the mystery is deeper than Israel ever imagined. Even the genealogies, those long lists of names that so many skip over, are not meaningless. They carry the bloodline from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to David, all the way forward, preserving the line that will one day lead to the Messiah. Think about that. Generation after generation, despite wars, famines, exiles, and betrayals, the line is never broken. Enemies tried to wipe it out. Kings failed to protect it, yet somehow it endured. Why? Because history was being guided toward a divine appointment. And soon, in the fullness of time, the promise would take on flesh. But before we get there, the prophets have left behind clues, riddles wrapped in poetry, visions that still stir wonder today. The next stop will take us into their words, words that blaze like fire and whisper like the wind. Isaiah speaks of a child born to a virgin, a son called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace. He describes a suffering servant, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Jeremiah speaks of a new covenant, not written on stone, but on hearts of flesh. Ezekiel sees a river flowing from the temple, bringing life wherever it goes. Daniel sees visions of beasts and empires, but also of the Son of Man, who receives everlasting dominion. These were not just words for their own time. They were glimpses of something far greater. And here's the most fascinating part. Many of these prophecies seemed impossible. A king from David's line when the throne was gone. A servant who suffers, but somehow triumphs. A kingdom without end when Israel itself was in ruins. Impossible, unless history itself was being shaped by unseen hands. And that is exactly what the Old Testament keeps showing us. A God who writes the story from beginning to end. But the story doesn't end with Israel. It expands to embrace the nations, and that twist will be even more astonishing than what came before. The Psalms, too, hide secrets in their poetry. Some celebrate God's kingship, others cry out in despair, but scattered among them are words that foreshadow events yet to come. They pierced my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them. My God, why have you forsaken me? Written hundreds of years before the events of the New Testament, these lines echo forward like a prophetic drumbeat, building anticipation for a moment when those words will be lived out in flesh and blood. And the wisdom books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, job wrestle with life's deepest questions. Why do the righteous suffer? What is the meaning of life under the sun? Where can wisdom truly be found? Questions that remain unresolved in the Old Testament, yet hint that the answers are on their way. The next chapter will bring those answers, but not in the way anyone expected. And then we come to the closing of the Old Testament with the prophet Malachi. He warns of judgment, but also speaks of a messenger who will prepare the way. He describes the coming of the Lord himself, suddenly entering his temple. And then silence. No more prophets, no more visions. Just waiting. Centuries of waiting. But here is the astonishing thing. In that silence, God is not absent. He is preparing the stage, aligning the empires, setting the languages, building the roads, shaping the world so that when the next act begins, the message can travel farther and faster than ever before. The curtain is about to rise on the greatest drama in history, and the Old Testament has set the stage perfectly. Every thread, every shadow, every symbol is now pointing to the moment when the Word will become flesh. And that, my friends, is where the story explodes into its most breathtaking chapter yet. But we're not finished with the Old Testament's riches just yet, because buried within its pages are patterns and mysteries that still hold more secrets. The next layer will take us deeper into those mysteries, and what we find there will prepare us even more for the revelation that is about to come. Now let's pull back the curtain on one of the most overlooked yet astonishing parts of the Old Testament, the laws and rituals, especially in Leviticus. At first glance, these endless details about sacrifices, offerings, and purity laws seem dry, even boring. But hidden inside them is a secret code, a prophetic blueprint of something so much greater. Every burnt offering, every grain offering, every scapegoat on the Day of Atonement, all point beyond themselves. Think about the scapegoat. Once a year, the high priest would place his hands on a goat, symbolically transferring the sins of the nation onto it, and then send it away into the wilderness. But why? Was it only a ritual, or was it a shadow of something still to come, when sin itself would be carried away once and for all? The rituals of the tabernacle whisper to us that the real story is still unfolding. And if the sacrifices point to something greater, the very design of the tabernacle itself may hide even more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. The tabernacle wasn't just a tent, it was a physical symbol of heaven meeting earth. Every detail mattered. The Ark of the Covenant with its mercy seat, the golden lampstand shaped like a tree of life, the veil separating the Holy of Holies from ordinary men. Even the colors of the curtains, the arrangement of the tribes around the camp, the garments of the priests, all of it was a living symbol, a language of God written not with ink, but with wood, cloth, and fire. And here's the fascinating part. When the prophets later speak of God's dwelling, when visions describe heavenly thrones and living creatures, the imagery mirrors the tabernacle. Could it be that the tabernacle was never just a tent in the desert, but a window into the realities of heaven itself? If so, then what happens when that veil is finally torn? The answer lies ahead, but before we get there, we must travel through Israel's unfolding story to see how their faithfulness or lack of it intertwines with these mysteries. The next layer will reveal not just symbols, but patterns that ripple through history itself. Patterns in the Old Testament are not accidents, they are deliberate echoes. Take, for example, the recurring theme of barren women who miraculously give birth. Sarah, too old to conceive, yet giving birth to Isaac. Hannah, mocked for her barrenness, yet giving birth to Samuel, the prophet who anoints kings. Even Rachel, who struggles for years before giving birth to Joseph. Each story is more than a personal miracle. It's a divine pattern pointing to an even greater miraculous birth that will one day break the silence of heaven. And speaking of patterns, notice the repeated cycle of exile and return. Adam and Eve exiled from Eden. Israel exiled in Babylon. And yet always there is the promise of return, restoration, and redemption. The Old Testament is filled with these cycles, like drumbeats, building tension for the ultimate resolution. But before we discover that resolution, we need to dig into another layer, the prophets who didn't just warn and rebuke, but also painted visions of cosmic battles and divine mysteries still to come. The next part will be even more dramatic than what we've seen so far. Consider Ezekiel, with his visions of wheels within wheels, strange living creatures covered with eyes, and a throne of blazing glory. These are not simple images. They are glimpses of realities beyond human understanding, snapshots of a dimension beyond our own. And then there is Daniel, standing in the courts of Babylon, yet seeing visions of empires rising and falling, culminating in a mysterious figure, one like a son of man, who comes with the clouds of heaven and is given dominion that never ends. These are not just dreams about the future of Israel. They are prophecies about the destiny of the entire world. But here is where it gets even more fascinating. These prophets speak of kingdoms that history confirms: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and yet they also speak of a kingdom beyond history, a kingdom that breaks into time itself. What kind of kingdom could that be? That is the secret the Old Testament keeps hinting at, a secret that the next part of the story will finally unveil. But let's not forget the Psalms, those songs that seem to speak the full range of human emotion. Some are filled with joy and victory, others with despair and longing. Yet tucked inside their poetry are hidden prophecies, like secret messages embedded in the lyrics. You will not abandon me to the grave. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. These are not random lines. They are puzzle pieces, waiting to be put together when the time is right. And when they finally align, the picture they reveal is stunning. But until that moment, the Psalms keep the mystery alive, echoing through temple courts, family gatherings, and the private prayers of countless generations. And just when you think you've grasped their meaning, another layer appears, and you realize the story is even deeper. The next stage will uncover not just words, but the lives of those who lived out these promises in real history. Now look at the kings of Judah and Israel, a line of men who sit on thrones but cannot hold them. Some, like Hezekiah, show flashes of faith and courage. Others, like Manasseh, plunge the nation into idolatry and bloodshed. Yet through them all runs a fragile thread, a line of David, preserved by grace alone. The kingdom falls, the people are carried into exile, the temple is destroyed, yet somehow the thread is never cut. Why? Because God made a promise to David, a promise that one of his descendants would reign forever. And even when the throne stands empty, that promise still hangs in the air like a thundercloud, waiting to burst. The tension is almost unbearable. How can a fallen kingdom give birth to an eternal king? And the next turn in the story will bring us closer than ever to the answer. By the time we reach the closing of the Old Testament, every story, every prophecy, every symbol is vibrating with expectation. The law has shown humanity's need for redemption. The prophets have spoken of a coming king and a new covenant. The Psalms have sung of suffering and victory. The history of Israel has revealed the fragility of human leaders and the unbreakable faithfulness of God. And then, silence. 4 centuries of silence. But silence is not the end. It is the pause before the crescendo. Something is coming. Someone is coming. And when he comes, he will not just fulfill the Old Testament. He will unlock it, reveal its hidden depths, and transform its shadows into blazing light. The next revelation will not just be interesting. It will be the turning point of all history. And that, my friends, is where the Old Testament leaves us hanging, breathless, waiting for the curtain to rise on the greatest act of all. Have you ever noticed that the Old Testament is full of numbers 40 days, 7 years, 12 tribes, 70 nations? To the casual reader, they may look like random details, but dig deeper, and you will find that numbers are part of the divine language coded into the story. 7, for example, isn't just a number of days in a week. It's the number of completion. From the 7 days of creation to the 7 feasts, from the 7 lamps on the menorah to the sevenfold Spirit mentioned by the prophets, the pattern screams of divine perfection. Then there's the number 40. 40 days of rain in the flood, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 days of fasting for Moses and Elijah. 40 marks a period of testing, trial, and transformation. And what about 12 the 12 tribes? The 12 stones on the priest's breastplate, the 12 gates of the future city seen in visions? Each number is a whisper, a clue, a piece of a larger puzzle that stretches beyond the Old Testament itself. But if numbers can hold secrets, then what about names? The next secret is hidden not in numbers, but in the very names of the people themselves. Names in the Old Testament aren't just labels. They carry meaning, destiny, and prophecy. Take the genealogy in Genesis 5, often skipped as a boring list of fathers and sons. But if you line up the meanings of those names, they form a hidden message. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing rest. Think about that long before the New Testament, before Israel even existed. The gospel itself was encoded in the names of Adam's descendants. Abraham's name changed from Abram to Abraham. Jacob becoming Israel. Hosea renamed Joshua. Each shift marks a divine turning point. Names are not accidents. They are prophecies. So if the names carry messages, what about the visions? The next mysteries are locked inside the strange, almost surreal visions of the prophet's visions that seem bizarre on the surface, but hide truths far too big for ordinary language. Consider Jacob's dream of a ladder reaching to heaven, angels ascending and descending. Was it just a dream, or was it a prophetic symbol of a future bridge between heaven and earth? Or think of Isaiah's vision of the throne, the seraphim crying, "Holy, holy, holy," the foundations shaking at the voice of the Lord. These are not merely religious experiences, they are peeks into another realm, revelations of realities that intersect with our world in ways most people never imagine. And then there's Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones, a graveyard bursting into life at the breath of God. That vision wasn't just about Israel's return from exile. It was a hint at something greater, a resurrection that would one day shake the entire cosmos. And speaking of angels, they are everywhere in the Old Testament, often hidden in plain sight. The next revelation will peel back the curtain on these mysterious beings who appear at critical moments and vanish just as suddenly. Angels guard Eden's entrance with flaming swords, appear to Abraham at Mamre, wrestle with Jacob through the night, and speak to Daniel with messages of empires and wars. Sometimes they appear as ordinary men, other times in terrifying glory. But even more mysterious is the figure often called the angel of the Lord, who speaks as God, receives worship as God, yet also appears distinct from God. Who is he? Some believe he is a foreshadowing, a pre-incarnate appearance of the one who is to come. If that's true, then the Old Testament is not just pointing forward to the Messiah. It is already giving us glimpses of him before he ever takes on flesh. But if angels can carry such weight, then what about covenants, the binding agreements God makes with humanity? The next discovery will take us into the covenants, the backbone of the Old Testament story, each one stacking on top of the other, building towards something far greater. God's covenants are like a golden thread weaving through history. With Noah, a promise never to flood the earth again. With Abraham, a promise of land, descendants, and a blessing for all nations. With Israel at Sinai, a covenant of law, sealed with blood. With David, a covenant of kingship, a throne that will last forever. Each covenant adds a new dimension, like pieces of a staircase leading upward, higher and higher, toward the ultimate covenant still to come. But here's the twist. Israel keeps breaking the covenants. They turn to idols, shed innocent blood, and rebel against God's commands. Yet instead of tearing up the contract, God promises something new. "I will make a new covenant," says Jeremiah. "I will write it on their hearts." This new covenant is unlike anything before, and it stands waiting just over the horizon of the Old Testament. The next step will reveal how even Israel's failures serve as fuel for God's greater plan. Take the exile, for example. On the surface, it looks like utter defeat. Jerusalem burned, the temple destroyed, the people enslaved in Babylon. But in exile, something remarkable happens. The scriptures are collected, copied, and preserved with a new intensity. Synagogues begin to form, places of worship and teaching that will spread across the world. Even in captivity, the Jewish people grow stronger in their identity, preparing the way for something greater. It's as if God takes disaster and turns it into preparation. And this pattern repeats again and again. What looks like the end becomes the beginning of something new. It's almost as if the Old Testament itself is training us to expect the unexpected, to look for light hidden inside the darkest places. And if that's true, then the greatest light of all must be hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed. The next secret is hidden in prophecy so precise, so detailed, that it defies explanation, unless history itself was being written in advance. Look at Daniel's vision of 70 weeks, predicting not just the rise of kingdoms, but the exact timeline leading to the Anointed One. Or Micah, who names Bethlehem as the birthplace of the coming ruler centuries before it happens. Or Zechariah, who describes a king entering Jerusalem on a donkey, and later being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. These are not vague predictions. They are razor-sharp prophecies, impossible to ignore. The Old Testament is filled with them, each one a piece of a larger mosaic. But here's the most thrilling part. Most of these prophecies remained unfulfilled by the time the Old Testament closed. They hung in the air, like arrows frozen in mid-flight, waiting for the moment when time itself would release them. And when they land, the world will never be the same. The next stage of the story is not just more interesting, it is the climax, the unveiling of everything the Old Testament has been whispering all along. Now, if the prophets shook us with visions of kingdoms and cosmic battles, the story of Joseph in Genesis reveals something even more stunning. Joseph is not just a character. He is a foreshadow, a shadow cast centuries ahead toward a greater figure. Betrayed by his brothers for pieces of silver, falsely accused, thrown into the pit, and later exalted to the right hand of power, Joseph's life is a mirror image of something larger. He forgives those who betrayed him and saves not only Egypt, but the very brothers who once hated him. Do you see the pattern? This is not coincidence. This is prophecy through storytelling. And if Joseph's story encodes such a future mystery, then what about Moses? The next revelation will show you how Moses' journey hides one of the most powerful secrets of all time. Moses is the great deliverer, but his story runs deeper than just leading slaves to freedom. As a baby, he escapes a decree of death on Hebrew boys. As a man, he passes through water, wanders in the wilderness for 40 years, and ascends a mountain to speak with God face to face. Every step of his life echoes forward into something beyond him. The Passover lamb whose blood on the doorposts saves the people from death. That's not just ritual, it's prophecy in disguise. The manna in the wilderness, the water from the rock, the bronze serpent lifted up for healing. All of these are living previews, rehearsals of a drama that has not yet reached its stage. If Moses points forward, then what about the feasts commanded in the law? The next layer is even more fascinating, because the feasts of Israel are not just ancient traditions, they are a calendar of secrets. Think about it. The Feast of Passover, when the lamb is sacrificed, happens exactly in spring. The Feast of First Fruits comes days later, celebrating the first harvest. Then Pentecost, weeks after, a feast of revelation and outpouring. Each one corresponds not only to agricultural cycles, but to future events still waiting in the shadows. And then there are the fall feasts, trumpets, atonement, tabernacles, mysterious, solemn, and still not fully explained even to this day. Could it be that these festivals were designed as a divine timetable, pointing to events yet to unfold? And if the feasts hold such secrets, what about the tabernacle itself, the portable sanctuary built by Moses in the wilderness? The next one will take you into the very blueprint of the tabernacle, where every piece of furniture whispers of something far greater. Step inside the tabernacle, and you enter a symbolic universe, the altar of sacrifice, where blood is shed, the basin of water, where cleansing takes place, the golden lampstand, burning with perpetual fire, the table of bread, holding 12 loaves, the altar of incense, smoke rising like prayer, and beyond the veil, the Ark of the Covenant, 2 cherubim with wings outstretched, guarding the very throne of God. None of this is random. Each detail is deliberate, each design a prophecy in physical form. The lampstand is light and darkness, the bread is life itself, the incense is mediation, and the Ark is the throne of the invisible King. But here is the astonishing part. The veil separating the people from the presence of God, it was a wall of separation waiting to be torn. And that tearing would one day become the most dramatic moment in all of history. But before that moment comes, another building must rise. The next stage will bring us into Solomon's temple, a wonder of the ancient world, built with mysteries etched into its very stones. The temple in Jerusalem was more than a building, it was a cosmic symbol. Constructed with measurements that echo Eden, decorated with palm trees, pomegranates, and cherubim, it was a miniature picture of heaven meeting earth. When Solomon dedicated the temple, fire fell from heaven, and the glory of God filled the house so completely that the priests could not even stand. But hidden within this glory was a warning: the temple would not last. The prophets warned of its destruction, and indeed it fell, rebuilt, and fell again. But the idea of the temple did not disappear. It grew larger, transforming into something not made by human hands. The temple was only ever a signpost pointing beyond itself. And if the temple was a shadow, then the sacrifices within it were shadows too, each animal, each drop of blood, pointing forward to something far more profound. The next revelation will unlock the meaning of those sacrifices, and why they mattered far beyond their time. The sacrifices were not simply rituals of an ancient culture. They were symbols of substitution, of life given in place of another. The lamb, the goat, the bull, the dove, each one bore the weight of sin, symbolically cleansing the guilty through the death of the innocent. Year after year, sacrifice after sacrifice, the blood flowed, but never fully erased the problem. It was a cycle, an endless reminder that the true solution had not yet arrived. And even the greatest of sacrifices, the Day of Atonement, when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies with blood, was only a rehearsal, a temporary covering, not a final solution. But hidden within this endless cycle was a promise, an expectation that one day a sacrifice would come that would end all sacrifices forever. And if sacrifices hold such foreshadows, what about the priesthood itself? The next step will uncover the secrets of the priesthood, and why even the holiest men in Israel could never finish the job they were called to do. The priests of Israel were mediators, standing between God and the people, offering sacrifices, burning incense, and pronouncing blessings. But even the holiest high priest was flawed. He had to offer sacrifices for his own sins before he could atone for the people. They wore garments covered in symbolism, the breastplate with 12 stones, the crown engraved with "Holiness to the Lord," the bells and pomegranates on their robes. Every detail screamed of something higher, something beyond them. The priesthood was not the end, it was a pointer. And there are hints, even in the Old Testament, of another kind of priesthood, older, greater, eternal. The mysterious figure of Melchizedek appears, blessing Abraham with bread and wine, a priest of the Most High without genealogy or end. Who was he? A symbol? A foreshadow? A glimpse of someone greater still? The mystery of Melchizedek is one of the Old Testament's deepest secrets, and the next revelation will only deepen the intrigue. Melchizedek comes and goes in just a few verses, but his shadow stretches across centuries. He appears suddenly, blesses, receives an offering, and vanishes. No father, no mother, no genealogy, no record of his death. His very name means King of Righteousness, and he rules in Salem peace. Righteousness and peace, two words that the prophets long said would only kiss when the final king arrived. Could Melchizedek be a living prophecy, a window into a priesthood greater than Aaron's, a priesthood that never ends? The ancient rabbis puzzled over it, later writers wrestled with it, and even today it remains a mystery that refuses to be fully explained. And if Melchizedek leaves us with questions, then what about the prophet's strangest visions? Wheels within wheels, beasts with multiple heads, statues of empires collapsing. The next stage takes us into apocalyptic visions, the most bizarre yet most revealing passages of the entire Old Testament. When we step into the world of apocalyptic visions, everything changes. Ezekiel sees wheels within wheels, creatures with 4 faces, and a throne of dazzling light above a crystal expanse. What are these visions? Were they spiritual metaphors, glimpses of heaven, or something else entirely? Some say Ezekiel described the indescribable. Others whisper he may have witnessed technology far beyond his time. Whichever way we read it, one thing is clear. His visions reveal a God of overwhelming power, moving in ways human minds can hardly process. And if Ezekiel leaves us speechless, the visions of Daniel take us even deeper. The next one will reveal how the rise and fall of world empires were predicted in symbol centuries before they ever appeared. Daniel stands as one of the most mysterious books of the Bible. A young man taken into Babylonian exile, he rises in power not by politics, but by revelation. He interprets the dream of a great statue: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. It is not just a dream. It is a timeline of empires: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and a final divided kingdom. Each metal corresponds perfectly with the history that followed. And then comes the vision of 4 beasts rising from the sea lion: bear, leopard, and a terrifying beast with iron teeth. Again, each one symbolizes a kingdom, a power on the stage of history. But the most chilling image is of a little horn rising up, speaking arrogant words, persecuting the saints, and changing times and laws. Who is this horn? Some say Antiochus Epiphanes, others see Rome, and many look forward to a final world ruler not yet revealed. And just when you think it can't get more intense, Daniel speaks of 70 weeks, prophetic countdown that seems to calculate the very moment of a coming Messiah. But if Daniel gives us the timeline, the next prophet gives us the raw emotion. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, who reveals the heart of God like no one else. Jeremiah's voice is one of tears and fire. He stands in Jerusalem as it falls, warning of destruction while aching for his people. His laments cut deep. My eyes overflow with tears, for my people are destroyed. But even in despair, he speaks of a new covenant, written not on stone, but on hearts. A covenant of forgiveness, where sins are remembered no more. This was unheard of at the time, a promise of transformation, not just ritual obedience. Imagine hearing that in a world where religion was bound to temple and sacrifice. Jeremiah dares to proclaim that one day God himself will rewrite the story of humanity from the inside out. But if Jeremiah gives us the promise of a new heart, the prophet Isaiah gives us the most breathtaking portrait of the mysterious servant who will suffer, die, and somehow bring healing to the nations. And the next one, Isaiah's servant songs, are among the most shocking prophecies ever written. Isaiah writes with poetry that pierces the soul. He speaks of a child born, a son given, whose name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He paints the image of a suffering servant, despised and rejected, pierced for transgressions, crushed for iniquities, and yet bringing peace through his wounds. This is not a vague spiritual idea. It is an exact portrait written centuries before it happened. Even ancient rabbis wrestled with Isaiah 53, unsure of whether it described Israel, the prophets, or some future individual. Today, millions recognize it as one of the clearest previews of something world-changing. But Isaiah doesn't stop there. He also speaks of wolves lying with lambs, deserts blooming, nations streaming to Jerusalem, and a time when death itself will be swallowed up forever. If Isaiah pulls us forward into a cosmic future, then Malachi, the final prophet of the Old Testament, closes the curtain with a haunting cliffhanger. And the next stage will show you why the last verses of Malachi left Israel in silence for 400 years. Malachi warns of judgment, but also speaks of a messenger who will prepare the way. He says the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and the Lord himself will suddenly come to his temple. Then silence. 4 centuries of waiting. No prophets, no visions, no voice from heaven. But silence does not mean inactivity. In those 400 years, empires rose and fell: Persia, Greece, and Rome. The Greek language spread, making a single tongue understood across nations. Roman roads and armies unified the world, preparing a stage. Secret groups emerged: the Pharisees with their strict laws, the Sadducees with their priestly power, the Essenes withdrawing into the wilderness, waiting for a coming one. Hidden writings, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, spoke of war between sons of light and sons of darkness. It was a world pregnant with expectation, waiting for something to break the silence. And when the silence was finally shattered, it was not with a warrior or a king, but with the cry of a baby in Bethlehem. The next revelation will take us into the arrival that changed time itself, the birth that divided history into before and after. The birth in Bethlehem was no ordinary birth. Shepherds saw the skies explode with light, angels declaring peace on earth. Wise men from distant lands followed a star, bringing gifts fit for a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Even the gifts themselves whispered secrets: gold for royalty, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for death and burial. The baby was wrapped in swaddling cloths and laid in a manger, the feeding trough already pointing to one who would call himself the bread of life. But notice how dangerous this birth was. A paranoid king, Herod, ordered the massacre of infants just to destroy this child. Already, light and darkness clashed at his very arrival. And this was only the beginning, because the next one will not just be a child in a manger. It will be the voice crying in the wilderness, preparing the way for a revolution unlike anything the world had ever seen. We've traveled a long way together through the mysteries of the Old Testament, from the creation of the world to the prophetic visions that still shake us today. We've seen how Ezekiel's wheels within wheels opened our imagination, how Daniel's timeline revealed the rise and fall of empires, how Jeremiah's tears spoke of a new covenant, how Isaiah painted the suffering servant with stunning clarity, and how Malachi left us in suspense with a prophecy that hung in silence for 400 years. Then we stepped into Bethlehem, where that silence was shattered with the cry of a newborn king, a child who would grow to change history forever. Every story, every prophecy, every vision is like a piece of a grand puzzle, leading us closer to secrets that still wait to be uncovered. And what's even more exciting is that we've only scratched the surface. The next chapter, the rise of John the Baptist, the ministry of Jesus, the miracles that baffled skeptics, and the shocking crucifixion and resurrection, will be even more eye-opening. After that comes the explosive birth of the early church, and finally, the most mysterious book of them all, Revelation, where the symbols of the end times connect back to everything we've just explored. But before we move forward, I want to hear from you. What stood out to you the most in today's journey? Was it Daniel's beasts? Isaiah's suffering servant? Or maybe the silence after Malachi that set the stage for Bethlehem? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your insights and questions, and who knows, your comment might even spark the direction of the next episode. And if you found this video thought-provoking, make sure you hit that like button, because it helps more people discover these hidden treasures of the Old Testament. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episode. It's going to be even more mind-blowing. And of course, share this video with your friends and family. You never know who might need to hear the message hidden in these ancient words. The story isn't over, in fact. It's just getting started. The next one will take us deeper into secrets that have been waiting for thousands of years. Secrets that will connect prophecy to reality in ways that will shake you to your core. So stay tuned, because the best is still ahead.